å ha noe informasjon om det eksisterende publikum. Og da jeg vil tilbake til, det var noen som nevnte, det var en billettagentur her. Det er så mange av norske kulturinstitusjoner som gjør seg bruk av billettagenturene, som billettservice og andre. Og de får kjempedårlig oppfølging av de billettagenturene. De får ikke tilgang til de dataene de skal, de får ikke hjelp til å analysere det. Og dette har vi blitt kjent med delvis gjennom USUS-prosjektet vårt på CRM. Og det har lyst til å spille den ballen tilbake, jeg vet ikke hvem det var som nevnte det, men altså det tror jeg er et stort problem, spesielt for små og mellomstore organisasjoner. Og man kan for eksempel begynne å spørre hvem er det som eier disse dataene? Er det billettservice og billettagenturene, eller er det institusjonene selv? Og allerede der tror jeg ikke institusjonene og organisasjonene er klare på det, og de må kanskje forhandle litt mer robust i forhold til billettagenturene, slik at de får kontroll på de dataene. For hvis de ikke har tilgang til de, så er det et kjempestort potensial som ligger ubrukt. Så jeg vil bare spille det inn.
Vil du kommentere på det, Emma? Nei, Egil sier, det er jo helt riktig. Jeg hadde ikke tenkt å snakke så veldig mye direkte om billettsystemene akkurat her, men det er jo det Egil sier har vi jo sett ikke bare i Arena USUS, men vi ser jo det ved mange av de andre. Når vi går virkelig inn i dybden på de forholdene, relasjonene man har med billettagentene, og noen har veldig gode forhold. Altså, det er jo det som er litt av problemet her, tror jeg. Noen kjenner seg bare virkelig ikke igjen. Vi får excellent help. Vi får masse oppbacking fra hvem det nå er de bruker. Men det er jo gjerne de litt store, tunge aktørene som har de 200 000 billettsalgene, mens de veldig små får ikke den samme hjelpen eller den samme relasjonen med de verktøyene der. Og det er litt det også jeg har lyst til å jobbe litt med, er jo nettopp det å få opp den bevisstgjøringen at det er andre måter å samle inn data på, det er andre måter å forhandle også med de ulike agentene på også, selvfølgelig. Men man kan også gjøre andre ting, og dere må gjerne komme og snakke med meg i pausen etterpå om dere er interessert i å vite noe mer om de type prosjektene vi jobber med om det. Men jeg hadde ikke tenkt å si så veldig mye om det nå.
Så vi skal ikke havne i en teknikalitet nå om det. Dette er nå løftet som en utfordring. Det kan vi snakke om videre. Neste spørsmål er... Ja, da vil jeg bare advare mot at vi skal ikke i gang med en sånn lang diskusjon om det nå, for det kan dere ta i pausen. Du skal få lov til å si noe veldig kort.
Ja, jeg bare tenkte jeg skulle si noe, for jeg følte meg litt utfordret der, så da tenkte jeg skulle belyse litt i hvert fall. Når det gjelder eierskap, så er det jo folk i Norge som stemmer dette her langt ovenfor alle oss i denne salen. Da har vi jo Datatilsynet og andre som styrer eierskapet. For oss er det egentlig ganske enkelt at det er den som vi har en avtale med i forhold til et billettsalg, som eier dataen. Og det er jo ikke vi som heller bestemmer. Vi ønsker å gjøre den mer tilgjengelig, og vi merker en veldig økning i folk som ønsker tilgang til dataen, som egentlig er veldig gledelig, men vi kan ikke dele den ut til alle, slik at alle begynner å kontakte disse menneskene som har kjøpt billettene, for det er i Norge ikke lov, og jeg tror heller ikke publikum har en stor glede av det før det her begynner å bli satt ordentlig i system. Så det er en utfordring i seg selv. Men vi vet veldig mye om publikum, og vi imøteser veldig konkrete briefer på hva dere lurer på angående deres publikum. Og det er utrolig mye lettere for oss å gi kjempegode svar når vi får en konkret brief til, som ble nevnt veldig tydelig fra Emma, om at hvis man har en konkret utfordring på hva man vil med dataen, hvor man vil den med kunsten sin, og hvilke publikum man ønsker å nå, så er det mye lettere å svare. Og vi tar gjerne utfordringer. Vi jobber stadig tettere og tettere med mange arrangører på å finne riktig data. Uansett størrelse. Små og store. Alle sammen.
Veldig bra. Da har vi fått 2 innspill, og den diskusjonen kan jo da foregå med hete i pausen. Et spørsmål til?
Ja, Jørn Johansen, Deichmanske. Veldig interessante funn. Over halvparten har ikke kompetanse til strategisk jobbing med publikum, sier undersøkelsen din. Nesten 60% vet for lite om sitt eksisterende publikum. Og så vet jeg ikke om jeg fikk det med meg riktig, men så vidt jeg kunne se, så var det over 50% som ikke tar hensyn i stor eller liten grad til de funnene som de har i de eventuelle brukerundersøkelsene. Kan du si noe mer om Hvorfor gjør det ikke det?
Jeg tror kanskje det er ikke en vane for å gjøre det. Ja, jeg lurer på om det... det er jo et spørsmål vi ikke har spurt direkte, så da er det jo litt mer meg som synes litt her. Men det kan jo... Jeg tenker at man er opptatt av produktet sitt som sådan, ikke sant? Som det kunstneriske produktet. Det har jo mange sitater som sier nettopp det, at vi lever ikke av å telle publikum, vi lever av å formidle og lage kunst. Så jeg tror det er liksom det som står i fokus, og at man kanskje ikke man ikke bare kommer på det, det er en ting, men jeg tror kanskje også det er en litt sånn, dette her er ikke noe for oss, det er ikke sånn vi lager våre formidlingsaktiviteter, det er ikke sånn vi programmerer. Så jeg tror det kan handle litt om en sånn mix av grunner.
Veldig bra. Da må jeg sette strek. Tusen takk til deg, Emma.
Tusen takk for meg. Ja.
Emma har presentert en analyse som handler om innhenting av data. Og så er rådet å vite veldig tydelig hva du vil med de dataene. Hvem er det du vil nå? Og da kommer vi elegant over på ordet segmentering. And this is where we switch into English. We have invited two experts on the field of segmentation, and they will do their presentation, and then we'll have a conversation afterwards, and you will be able to ask questions. So please welcome Katie Rains.
Hello, nice to see you all this afternoon. Thank you very much to Ingrid for inviting me to come and talk to you about segmentation this afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about sensible segmentation. Hopefully there are no other kinds of segmentation. But I know from conversations with Ingrid and conversations I've had with some of you since my visits to Norway, that there can be a lot of confusion about segmentation. It can sound very complicated. And what I'm going to tell you about this afternoon, hopefully, is that it's not rocket science, and anybody that tries to tell you that it is, I think is talking rubbish. And it really can be very simple to get started. It can get more complicated as you go along, but getting started can really be very straightforward. This is my favourite quote about segmentation. Say something to somebody rather than nothing to everybody. And in my experience of working in arts marketing in the UK for over 25 years, is we've done quite a lot of saying nothing to everybody. And I hope there's nobody here that's guilty of that. I'm sure there isn't. But I would challenge you to think about that, because it's actually very easy to say nothing to everybody. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned in the UK about that a bit later on. So for those of you, I know that in Emma's survey, around half of you haven't done any form of segmentation at all. So forgive me just for this Mickey Mouse bit of the presentation. But let's just be clear about what segmentation is. Okay, so it's about splitting your audiences or your potential audiences into groups or segments that are likely to share a similar level or type of interest in what you do. And why are you trying to do that? So that you can communicate with them in a different way from each other. Because if they have a set of needs and wants from you that are different to that set of people, you want to communicate with them differently. And why do you want to do that? Well, so that you can persuade more of them to engage with you. And actually, there's a byproduct of this that often you can save money as well by doing it, but we'll talk about that a bit later. It's important to understand people play fast and loose with the term segmentation, which highly annoys me, because actually it's just a method, and it can be applied in lots of different ways. And it's important to understand that there's quite a distinct difference between a segmentation of the whole population and a segmentation of just your audience or your customers. So a population segmentation, say a shampoo company, may well segment the whole population of Norway based on their hair colour or type or hair thickness, so that they can create products that are suitable for those different segments. There is no point in them trying to sell a shampoo to me for a brunette, because it's never going to work, or I'm not going to buy it. Okay, so they will have a population segmentation based on hair colour and type. That population segment, I would argue, and you can argue with me later, but that segmentation is probably not going to be that useful to you in the arts. So you need to think about whether the population segmentations that exist out there are actually of any use to you, because just because they're there doesn't mean that you should use them. And then there's obviously audience segmentation, where you're looking at just your own audience and how they behave with you. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. So how do you decide what kind of approach to use in segmentation? Well, it all depends. Don't you hate it when consultants say that? It all depends. Just give us a straight answer, Katie. Well, it all depends. It depends, and what it depends on, I think, is your audience development priorities. Now, apologies if you've seen this grid many times before, but this is basically an Ansoff matrix that I always use to try and explain audience development, because people get themselves tied up in knots with audience development, don't they? Along one axis, we've got the kind of work that you do. And you have choices to make as an organisation, whether you just carry on doing the same type of work that you've always done, or whether you create different types of work, maybe different formats for that work, or actually different types of work entirely. So there's decisions to be made there. At the left-hand side, we have the audiences. And again, you need to decide whether your priorities are your existing audience or getting a new audience. What are the priorities here? Now, in my experience, most people, or often when people talk about audience development, they're talking about that box or that box. They're talking about, when they say audience development, they actually mean new audiences. Okay, getting different people, either to attend the work they're already doing or to attend new kinds of work, or possibly creating new kinds of work in order to get those audiences. But I'm going to argue to you that actually all of this is audience development, and that you should be thinking about all these four boxes and not just one or two of them. But you need to decide what your priorities are as an organisation. I think it's perfectly valid to say that it is an audience development objective to increase loyalty and frequency from your existing audience for your existing work. That is a completely valid audience development priority. I don't believe that audience development has to have new audience in it. Now, you'd probably be very stupid if you just did that, which is why it needs to be in balance. Similarly, you may decide that it's really important to you that your existing audiences deepen their engagement with you, either by attending different kinds of work that you do, or perhaps coming to the after-show talks or the education work that you do, so deepening their engagement with you. And then as you get to the top of the box, as you're talking about the new audiences, you're talking about new audiences for existing work, which is basically about growing audiences, or completely diversifying what you do in terms of both new audiences and new products. It's important to remember, and this isn't to put you off doing the stuff at the top, but you do need to be very realistic about the fact that along that axis, it takes time and it costs money, okay? I'm going to tell you a story about what happened in the UK with this, using this model for a minute. I think arts marketers in the UK have had a pretty tough time over the last 20 years. It's been quite confusing what we're supposed to be doing. In the top boxes, along the top, on the one hand, we've got a lot of pressure to go and get new audiences. And I think this chimes with Ingrid's introduction, actually. That what we found in the UK was when the Labour Blair government came in 1997, it was a big push for them that the arts should go and get new audiences. Very important. A lot of political pressure on us to do that. So the arts councils were telling us that that's what we should focus on. At one point, we were even being measured on the percentage of new audiences we had versus the existing audience. Now, the problem with that is that if you're actually really rubbish at keeping your existing audience, you're doing really well at getting new audiences, aren't you? And it actually disincentivizes people to keep hold of their existing audiences. But that's another story. And then there's also internal pressures to do the stuff at the top. I often hear marketers having a bit of a moan. I know people don't moan, but arts marketers often moaning about the fact their artistic director has said to them, I see these audiences sitting out there. They're not the people I want. Go and find me some different ones. Because I don't like the look of them. Either they're too old, they're too white, they're too middle class, whatever it is, they don't like them. So it's the marketing department's job to go and find different people because the artistic director doesn't like who he's got. He's not prepared to change his product. He wants you to change the audience. So this pressures to do the stuff at the top. The problem with that, if we're just focused on that, which I think we were in danger of doing a little bit, over-focusing on that because of these pressures, was that actually we know it costs 5 times more to get a new customer than it does to keep an existing one. And that isn't to say we shouldn't do it, because we need to do it for the health of our organisations. But it's going to cost. And in our case, it costs time and it costs money. And while we were spending all our time and money on that, we completely took our eye off the ball down here. And I was one of the few people at the time going, but what about the existing audience? Oh, that's not sexy. Not interested in talking about them. That's not sexy. Audience development, new audiences, that's what we should all be doing. But the problem is that, meanwhile, we took our eye off the ball here, and what happened is marketing practice in terms of the existing audience became pretty shabby, and people were mailing everybody the same thing. They were then finding that the response rates were quite low to that, because actually if you mail everybody the same thing, you're saying nothing to everybody, aren't you, rather than something to somebody. So they got low response rates. Then, of course, email arrived. Great. We can say nothing to even more people. And because it got low response rates and we needed to fill the seats, let's just do it really often. And of course, what's the flip side of that is that actually what we saw was really low success rates in doing that because people were just turned off. So the work that I do, I make no apology for saying that most of my work is with arts organisations who want to tackle this bit first. We don't ignore the top bit, but my work is largely focused on turning that low success at the bottom of this square into high success. And there's 2 reasons why I think that's a really important place to start. 1, it lays the foundations so that when you put new audiences into that mix, they're not being lost. And secondly, it releases the time and the money. Once you've got this bit cracked, it releases a lot of money that you can then invest in initiatives to get new audiences. And it's going the right way round. Segmentation is one of the key tools that I use with many of my clients to turn low success into high success. Why should we bother? The 50% of you that haven't done it, I want to convince you, okay? And I know Andrew will do a really good job on convincing you as well. Firstly, customers are not equally valuable. This is an example of a very typical arts organisation in the UK. 6% of the bookers are worth 1/3 of the income in that year. So if you lose one of those customers at the top, it has a disproportionate effect than losing one at the bottom. We don't want to lose any customers, but actually recognising, and this might be uncomfortable for you to accept, some customers are financially, at least, more valuable than others. And it's worth having a think about that. Secondly, customers have different needs. Now, if we use this as a frequency pyramid, so the people at the bottom come once a year, this typical frequency pyramid for a UK arts organisation, I hope you're shocked by that 68% figure at the bottom. 68% of bookers typically coming only once a year. I looked at those stats from Arthur from the States, and all those people coming 3 times a month. Oh my God. So nearly 70% of our audiences, this is entirely typical, based on a study of over 100 organisations, coming once a year. Even if you just look at frequency, those people at the top have got very different needs from the people at the bottom, haven't they? Even just on a very basic communications level. If you start sending out pre-show emails to people, a week before they come, 2 weeks before they come, looking forward to seeing you, here's how to get here, where to park, where the bar is, those people at the top are going to be like, look, you tell me this. I come every other week. You tell me this all the time. I don't need to hear this. And you're just going to piss them off. But the people at the bottom, the people who've never been before, that's really important information for them. So if you're talking to everybody in the same way, it's not working. And that's just an example based on frequency. We could look at it in loads of other ways. This is an example of an orchestra based in Northern Ireland. They were doing things what I call the old way, which was mailing everybody the same thing. And this was snail mail, bits of huge brochures being posted to people. 32-page, lovely, glossy snippet. I'm one of the age of marketers that still sniff bits of print. 32-page season brochure, and it cost them £1 to produce and send that out. And they were getting back £1.60, so 1.6 for every pound that they were spending. We segmented their audiences simply based on the kinds of things that they had been to with that orchestra over the last 5 years. And we sent different bookers different things. And for 90% of the bookers, that actually meant sending them less information, but making it more relevant, or what we thought was more relevant to them. The return on investment increased to £21 for every pound spent. And the important thing to note here is, yes, okay, it saved them some money, and we got more bookers reattending. But most importantly, that money was used to reinvest in initiatives to go and find new audiences. It's not just about saving money. It's about creating a pot of money that they were then allowed to experiment with for new audiences. The third reason you need to be doing customer segmentation is customer expectations. Now, out there in the commercial world, consumers are used to being fed information that's relevant to them. So they're expecting, particularly if you're talking to them through direct communications, they're expecting that content, that communication, to match their needs and preferences. I'm going to give you an example, which some of you will have seen me give me before, but it's my favorite one because it involves wine. This is an online supermarket. A couple of Christmases ago, I'll use this as the excuse, I had lots of friends and family to stay over Christmas, so I bought lots of wine. And actually, my favorite tipple is white Sauvignon Blanc wine, so I bought lots of that. After Christmas, I got this email telling me about their January wine sale. Now, I don't know anybody at this supermarket, and I haven't been and had a look in their CRM system, so I don't know whether this is true. But my guess is that the reason that that picture is actually of a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc is because they looked at my data and they said, what is the type of wine she buys most of? Use that image in that email. And I'm even more convinced that it's not an accident when, I can hardly read this, but it says, as temperatures continue to fall, add some warmth to winter evenings with our latest special offers, including underlined 25% off Sauvignon Blanc. So in case I hadn't twigged with the image, they've underlined it all there. So this is it's actually a simple example. It's not rocket science. It's a simple example of where they're using the data and the information that they have on me to make that communication more relevant, to make it more likely that I will at least read it and hopefully go and buy truckloads more of Sauvignon Blanc. Second example I want to give you from the consumer world is I was bought a Kindle for Christmas a couple of Christmases ago. And you know how you have to go on and register it on Amazon in order to buy the books? First time I went on the website after I'd registered it, I was offered this. It knew that I hadn't bought a case. Well, I hadn't bought a case from Amazon anyway. So it offered me the chance to accessorize it. And then it suggested all the books, all the e-books I should be buying, using its knowledge of what paper books I had previously been buying. So it used that information really cleverly. Now, okay, Amazon are a bit clever, and we probably can't have the budgets and the brain power that they've got, but it's still quite a simple concept. So a couple of quick examples from UK arts organisations. The Lowry in Manchester, very similar size and type of organisation to this one. It has 3 theatre spaces, has art galleries, and they wanted to test if they could improve the response rates to their season brochure. So firstly, we segmented by frequency so that we could find the people who were most likely to respond. And then we followed up anybody who hadn't booked within a couple of weeks of receiving the brochure with a very targeted, personalised email based on the types of work they'd been to in the past. Just doing those 2 things, we reduced their costs by the equivalent of 1.3 million kroner per year, and their return on investment doubled. And you'll see that when we tested the untargeted approach to the targeted approach, the contemporary audience in particular, 5 times more effective with the targeted approach where we were focusing on the contemporary work rather than showing people everything. Symphony Hall in Birmingham, they have lots of one-night shows. They don't have long runs of theatre productions, 600 events a year. Just communicating that range of events to that audience is really difficult to cut through. So what they did is they segmented their audiences and actually produced different communications for each of them. And there's lots of detail behind this in terms of the kind of tone of voice we used for the family print compared to the serious classical audience, which wanted different sorts of information. I can talk to you about that at length, bore you at length, if you want to grab me later. But basically, they reduced their costs by 23%, and their return on investment doubled. And again, in both of these cases, that those cost savings were then used to experiment with new ways of getting new audiences. I just want to quickly show you a model that we use with quite a lot of our clients. And this is really to demonstrate how simple it can be. We do bespoke segmentations for people, but this is something we've used with a lot of mixed art form organisations with over 500,000 UK audiences in total so far. And it looks at strands of work rather than art forms. So music could sit in every one of these. You could have classical music, you could have rock and pop, you could have jazz. Similarly, drama. So I don't believe in art form segmentation because I think that people that go to new writing are very different to people that, well, they go for different reasons than people that go to Shakespeare. And the other thing that we found is that the people who attend these types of work do have quite significant differences from each other in other ways, making them segments in their own right. So that's broadly to give you a kind of taste of how we're classifying those events. But there's a big detailed conversation I can have with you about exactly how we do that coding and the detail that we go into to make sure that events are coded in the right way. But basically, between 80 and 90% of the audience, when you look at these audience databases, stick to one of those broad types. They may come very frequently, and they may come to a range of art forms within that, but they tend to stick to the classic work, or the mainstream work, or the contemporary work. Now, there's 2 responses to that. And the most typical one that I get from artistic directors when I go and present this to arts organisations is, well, we need to get more of those people from the outside then into the middle, actually crossing over. We need to educate them. We need to persuade them, especially those people that are coming to mainstream stuff, because actually we want them to become higher cultural beings like us. And the holy grail is always getting them to come to contemporary work, always. So there's this kind of notion that you can, yes. As you can tell, I'm not really a fan of this approach. The other way is we can actually accept that there are just different tribes of people who actually like different stuff. And that's okay. And what we need to do is have respect for their tastes and preferences and show them more of what we do that they love. And let's stop it being about the messages that we want to convey to them rather than what we think is right for them. So in terms of how we use that, at a very basic level, we have some organisations who are just using the strand and frequency. And the organisations who've just used that are seeing a 300% improvement on their marketing effectiveness. The ones who've worked with us for longer, we've added other layers, including understanding the motivations for them to come and their experience of the event. And interestingly, what Arthur was saying earlier about people being more socially motivated, we've actually seen that for some segments, one segment in particular, the mainstream segment, the social motivation is so much more important to them than it is to the classic or the contemporary people. So knowing that means we can start to use the right language when we're talking to them. It's not just about showing them the products we think they're interested in, but we can actually start talking to them in the right language as well. And then finally, we can actually start to understand what else they're doing with their leisure time. And again, that's really chimes with what Arthur was saying this morning, because we find that the other things they're doing with their time are very, very different from each other. The mainstream audience are going to theme parks. The classic audience are going to heritage properties. The contemporary audience are going to art house cinema. So we start to understand where else they're hanging out. And then it's actually quite easy, because we know these people so well now, to go and find more of the same, to go and find new people that are like them. So finally, what do I think good audience segmentation looks like? Well, firstly, it needs to be based on your audience development priorities. Secondly, it needs to be simple to understand. Anything that's so complicated that you can't explain it to your team and your organization, you're stuffed. It needs to be easy to implement. You've got to be able to do it. It needs to segment the whole audience. You need to be able to have everybody in the audience in one of those segments. And you need to be able to measure it. And it needs to be refined as you go on. So what we've found with our organizations is that we start on a very simple level. They start to build confidence. But more importantly, they start to learn themselves about the audience, about what they're responding to. And that learning becomes embedded in the organization, and they take that model on and refine it for themselves. So it can be refined as they learn about the audience, as maybe the product changes, and as people respond differently to what they're doing. So finally, I'm just going to leave you with my favorite quote. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. Say something to someone instead of nothing to everyone. I love that quote already. That's very, very interesting, and well done you for all that information. It's perfect timing. We're moving straight on to our next speaker. Now we've had one version of segmentation from Katie, and now I think we're going to hear another one from Andrew McIntyre. Welcome.
Hello, it's really exciting to be here and to see so many people here. I have spoken at a previous conference where there were about a quarter of the number, so it's exciting to see you all here. I'd like to talk to you about culture segments, but I'd particularly like to talk to you about the need to become fascinated by our audiences. Is it going to do it for me? No. Yes, okay, thank you. So, I suppose my story is that I started working in arts venues and became completely fascinated by how audiences engaged not only with the work or in museums with the exhibitions, but also with us as organizations, and what motivated them to come and what motivated them not to come. And so this idea of fascination, I think, is the key to be successful. We have to be people. We have to be absolutely fascinated by what goes on. When we started Maurice Hargreaves McIntyre, there were just 3 of us sharing that fascination. And as it's gone on, there are now lots of us. I don't know how we quite got that big. And we're doing it in lots of places around the world now. But what we share in common with all of these clients is that they're also fascinated by their audiences. They really, really get excited by understanding how people are engaging with what they do. And I think that's partly where they get their kick from, of really engaging audiences very deeply and understanding the value of that. So I'm going to ask you to do something for me if you haven't done it already. A lot of you will have a phone in your pocket, or an iPad, or a computer. I can see a few of them lighting up as I speak. So I'm just wondering, as well as listening to me and reading my slides, whether you can multitask And if you haven't already, whether you can actually log on to that and segment yourself while we're speaking. That's your challenge, okay? So I'll leave that little address up there. And honestly, this takes 90 seconds. So by the time we get to the exciting bit, you might know which segment you're in if you don't already, okay? So I'll leave that up there for you. And of course, you can do it in Norwegian, which might make it a bit quicker and easier for you. And right, so segmentation. I think Katie's done a really good job on explaining why we need to segment, but it is this idea that we can't treat people as a single homogeneous mass. We can't keep sending out one size fits all because it doesn't. But neither can we tailor our marketing messages to individuals on a really personalized level. It's not possible. You would need a marketing department of 100 people to get anywhere near that, and we're not going to have those resources. So segmentation is a good compromise in which we group people together with people who have shared needs. Now, there are different ways of doing this. We could group them together by shared behavior. All of these people have bought tickets for the ballet. Therefore, we know something about them. Unfortunately, I don't think that works. I have actually bought tickets for the ballet. I don't mean to offend anyone. Contemporary dance is one of my favorite art forms. I have to say that ballet, apologies to anyone who does ballet in the audience, leaves me cold. I don't like ballet. I've never liked ballet. I look at it, it looks pretty. I don't get it, it doesn't move me. I like lots of other art forms, but not ballet. But I have bought very expensive ballet tickets for my mother, who loves ballet. And ever since I bought those tickets, I keep getting letters from English National Ballet that start, "Dear ballet lover." So, be careful what we infer from people's booking behavior. So we need to create groups of people that have enough in common with each other for them to be treated as a distinct group and enough difference with the other groups. And so we're searching for that. How should we segment? So we need one of these. I get this everywhere I go. Organizations say we need more young people. I'll just leave you that. So we're often told we need to change the profile of the audience. We're going after all of these people. I think I was really, really interested in the whole idea of looking at generations. And I think that if you're thinking about your organization's relationship with the world, these are really useful concepts. I think the picture that they painted this morning was fantastic, and it was vivid because it tells you about shifts in society, and it tells you about the kind of ways, we got anything up there at all? Yeah. Kinds of ways in which you might relate to the world. So here are three representatives of their generations. You've got Mick Jagger there, and Bjork, and for those of you who don't know, if you've been under a stone, that's Harry Styles from One Direction. So there's our generational people. And I think this is quite interesting to understand how the shifts in attitudes in society and how your organization needs to understand those. The problem with it as a segmentation tool is it doesn't work very well. It works brilliantly in terms of a policy tool. So I was hooked, as you were this morning, on the lessons we need to learn. But if you try and apply this to segmentation, it breaks down because not all baby boomers are like Mick Jagger. I'll show you another baby boomer. This is Vladimir. He's not quite the same. If we look at Bjork in Generation X there, I should say I'm just Generation X. So who am I? Me. There's Bjork. Some of you maybe, and Sarah here. She's Generation X, and millennials. They are. My son is a millennial, and so is Harry here. But this guy is also millennial. I don't like him very much. And I don't think Harry would like him. I don't think my son would like him very much either. So there's quite a lot of different people caught within those same age groups. So although we can look at trends in society, and they're really useful for us, it doesn't really tell us about the individuals. Some millennials like contemporary dance, most of them don't. Some baby boomers like contemporary dance, most of them don't. Some Generation X like contemporary dance, most of them don't. So we have to find a better way of mining this data. So what we're looking at here is societal meta-trends, great. Personal psychology is somewhat slightly different. So here's my evolution of segmentation. We start with demographics. How old are you? Where are you from? Where do you live? And so on. This is interesting, and we should know this stuff, but it's not that useful. I don't know about you, but my people who are the same age as me are not the same as me. Then there's visiting behavior, and there's definitely some patterns in that, and I think Katie's brought some of them out, which is if somebody is a subscriber to the orchestra, then I think we could probably conclude that they like classical music and that they are going to come back, and so those things are predictable. But most people on most audience databases have only one ticketing history transaction, one, from which we can infer relatively little other than they haven't been back, although we don't even know that because a lot of them have been back but didn't buy the tickets last time. And some of them have got 2, 3 years apart, and I'm not sure what we know about that either. It could be for the same thing, could be for 2 different things. So it's actually quite difficult to find patterns when you have insufficient trend data. Geography. There's a lot of money being spent on looking at where people live and people's postal codes and so on. My next door neighbor is lovely, but not the same as me. Really doesn't go to any things I like. The woman next door to her is also lovely and is different again. So just because we live in the same street doesn't mean that we like the same things. Lifestyles is interesting. People who spend money on things and tend to have certain kinds of lifestyles might well be interested in certain kinds of events. And I think Arthur was very interesting talking about how we mix the social side of our events with other things. So this starts to become interesting. Attitudes becomes very interesting because people who share attitudes and perceptions of things often do gravitate towards things, but it's very, very hard to use in practice. It's really interesting, but difficult to use. And so what we get to is this. In the evolution of segmentation, you get to values, deep-seated values and beliefs. And so what we're really looking at here is what are the deep-seated things that drive your engagement with culture? And I think Arthur did a great job this morning about talking about why people want to engage with culture. What's in it for them? Why should they bother? So we often talk about the non-audience, the people who don't come, as with pity. We feel sorry for them for being deprived of the fantastic culture that we're actually, if you go out there, they're entirely happy without us. Yeah? They're not leading miserable lives. We don't need to save them. Yeah? So I think sometimes we can be a little bit patronizing. So maybe what we need to do is work out, how to convince them that they need to come. What is it that we're offering that they would like? And so this is a psychology model called the hierarchy of mind. This is the biggest version I've ever seen. And you'll see that what we've got here is, well, if we start at the top, purpose, who are you in the world, and all that stuff at the top. And then you've got your value system, which in turn informs your attitudes, and your attitudes frames your opinions, and your opinions frames but doesn't drive your behavior, and language is how you articulate it. And so we're looking at things that are really deep-seated at the top and things that are shallower down at the bottom. And so all of these approaches that we've typically used to segment are all in this relatively shallow layer. And what's at the top there, what we aim to do, is to create culture segments. Segments that are based on why do you want to engage with culture? What role do you think culture will play in your life? Why do you think that culture will actually make your life better? And what we've found is that there are 8 broad clusters of approach to that question. We're not suggesting there are 8 types of people in the world. There are A lot more than that. But there aren't even, 8 types of people in the room. But this is based on broad clusters of how people engage with culture. And it's based also on a sample of 250,000 cases in 15 countries. So this is cross-cultural, and it's based on a very, very robust sample. So if you like, I think what I'd say is that all that data that we've already got, the data about what people do, tells you the what, but the aim of culture segments is to tell you the why. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with culture segments, these are the 8 little pictures. Anybody managed to segment themselves while we've been talking? A few people, okay, fantastic. Which segment do you just call out? The orange one. Orange one obviously is the best one. Which is stimulation. Anyone else? Green. Oh, the green one. Oh, perspective. It's surprising you left the house this morning, but we'll get there. Anyone else? Well, yeah, you're half of you are purple. It's essence, and the characteristic of the purple one, the essence is that you hate being segmented. So you're so you're not going to enjoy the next bit. So. Let me, I should say for each of these segments, there is hugely detailed breakdowns, and including demographics. So we will actually talk about age, we'll talk about life cycle, we'll talk about whether you've got children, we'll talk about where you go, what you do, what you think, whether you buy things, whether you give money, whether you join, whether you volunteer. We'll talk about which social media you use. So these are really, really, really detailed for each one. But I'd like to, if I can, to sum up each of the 8 in terms of what our proposition is to them. So essence are, they look like core arts attenders. They are avid, they are really quite cultural, and they're called essence because they're the one segment who arts and culture isn't something they do, it's who they are. Taking it away would be like taking away oxygen. So they absolutely love the arts. The problem is that they are very, very inner-directed. They don't like being told what to do. They don't like following the crowd. So some of you who are in the purple segment there, you quite enjoy not liking things that everyone else likes. And maybe you quite enjoy liking things that other people don't like. You also are certain that you're making up your own mind of what to see. You don't like being influenced. And you think marketing is not aimed at you. It's aimed at other people who know less. So the offer is really this, is that the programming team has credentials. This is a piece of high quality work. It has depth. And it's not mainstream. It's for people who are discerning and sophisticated and knowledgeable. Let's start with expression. Expression are like the glue that hold the audience together. They're people. They're networkers. They like to be involved in things. They really support institutions in society. And they think that theatres and libraries and museums are good things and that we ought to get involved and support them. If you ask for their help, they'll give it. That phrase, if you want something doing, ask a busy person, was aimed at these people. They're volunteering, they're probably involved in charities, they're doing all kinds of things. But they're also organizing other people to come with them. You need to tell them it'll be immersive, it'll be emotional, that everyone will enjoy the shared experience, there'll be something to discuss, and really they want to feel part of something bigger than themselves. Affirmation here are really interesting. Anyone affirmation in the crowd? Affirmation are really interesting. They are the one segment who are the most conscientious and deliberate and driven to attend the arts. And that's partly because, as adults, they've decided that this stuff makes their life better. Some of the other segments just kind of do it naturally, or they've always done it all their lives. But affirmation have decided, they're the people who say, we should do this more often. Yeah? What are the things that we should be doing? And make a little bucket list of things. But the problem for affirmation, even if they're quite confident in one art form maybe, is that they look at the other art forms and they're not quite sure what to do, which is the right one to do, which is the right choice. And the problem with marketing for affirmation is that all marketing says that everything is the best. And so they can't trust it. So what they're looking for is trusted source, which they'll often get on the internet or from each other in terms of word of mouth. But they want to see it's got good reviews, they want to know that it's going to be relevant, but they don't want to be too out there, and they want to be able to tell other people they did it. They kind of want to see themselves as being cultural, and there's a little bit of they would quite like other people to see themselves as being quite cultural. So, enrichment. Tend to be a slightly older audience. These are not demographic, and there are some 15-year-olds in this age group as well. But enrichment like things that are established. They like nostalgia. They like heritage. They like things that are established and establishment. We often say that they like it even more if it's got the word royal in the title. So it's got to be familiar with classic themes and features, got to be well done, it's got to be a whole evening out, and they're a little bit price sensitive. They're looking for value in that proposition. Stimulation, obviously the best segment. What shall I say? The good news is we're incredibly intellectual and quite cerebral. We like ideas. We like it particularly when artistic organizations collide ideas together from different places that we weren't expecting, and do it in a different way, in a different place, and it sounds interesting and exciting and unusual. So we really get excited by that. The bad news is we are incredibly fickle, and we're like butterflies. As soon as your exciting event's over, we're off down the road to the next place where something exciting is happening. So in order to attract their attention again, you've got to keep sending up flares to keep letting us know that something is going on. So we go where the buzz is. We want to do really exciting, unusual, potentially contemporary things, but we would like to do them with a beer in our hand. So going back to Arthur's, social engagement. Release are time poor, or at least they think they are, because there's some evidence that they're nowhere near as busy as some of the other segments, but they just feel stressed. So they actually feel like, how can I possibly fit a trip to the arts in when I've got all of this other stuff to think about and worry about and do? Often they would have done more in the past. They feel wistful and regretful at not doing more cultural stuff and not seeing their friends more. They've become quite risk averse, because if they're only going to do one thing, it's got to be the right one. Don't waste, your only visit out this month, you don't want to waste it on something that was no good. So you're really looking for some kind of guarantee. And perspective, where were you? Hi. Perspective are fascinated by things, by stuff. They're really, really interested in things. And when I'm saying things, I don't mean everything, I mean things. So you find something that you're really interested in, and you follow it, and you're really interested in it. And I'm not saying you particularly personally, but really like reading, often quite like nature and outdoors. They like kind of being surrounded by things and the impact it has on them. They're the one segment who are the happiest and most content of all of them. All of the other 7 segments believe that there's something happening out there that's better than this, and they're missing out on it, and they're looking for it. Perspective think they've already found it, and so not bothering to look. And so you have to work quite hard to get their attention, because they're not looking, and you have to coincide with something they're quite interested in already, or they have to have a partner who drags them out of the house and makes them go and see some things. So, and finally, entertainment, who are the segment that make no distinction at all between arts, culture, heritage, and leisure, sport, eating out, whatever, because they just think it's leisure time that you spend outside the house. And it can do any of those things, it doesn't really matter. Whereas most of us have this kind of categorization system. Shall we do an arts thing or a sports thing? And they just do, shall we do a thing? And so if we're up against that, actually most of our marketing is pretty poor. So we don't really convince people that our thing is as good as those other things. So you have to find those people on their own terms. So culture segments now in 15 countries, I think. Just want to go through some of these. How do you use it? Strategies to grow, build, and orchestrate. So you can really cement your relationship with people by using this stuff in a very clever way. I'm going to whistle through quite a few examples, so strap yourself in. These slides will be available to you afterwards, so don't feel the need to think. And I'm also around today and tomorrow if you want to come and talk to me. So here we go. Marketing. So the problem with customer relationship management is that we don't have much relationship data to base it on, the R in the CRM. So we need the missing data. So the missing data is culture segments. The missing data is why are people wanting to do it? Why do they do stuff? So you can mine your own database for crossover between genres and art forms. I know that you've been to see Ibsen. I need a system that tells me you'd like contemporary dance, not that you'd like more Ibsen. So this is a way to actually understand why people are doing things and fit that to other offers that are coming rather than doing it on a genre basis. I don't believe there is a mainstream audience or a classic audience or a comedy audience. I think there are people who want to engage with culture on their own terms, and we have to help them fit lots of different things across that spectrum to what they want. So I'll give you this example of Sydney Opera House and Opera Australia. They use a very simple tool we've got to tag the records in their database. And in the first weekend that they did it, they got 21,000 of their records tagged with culture segments. So we now got venues that have got way more than 50% of their database tagged with culture segments. And what's interesting is that's far more than have got more than one booking. So there's lots of databases out there that only have one booking in, and we've actually got some of those culture segmented, so we know what they'd like next. How have we done it? We've done it through a tool called MHM Relationships, which is really simple and plugs into whatever database you've got. So we've got it running with Tessitura, we've got it running with Spectrix, with all kinds of things. So it profiles your, they ask, if anyone did that little questionnaire, it's that questionnaire plus another little couple of questions. So it profiles culture segments, their level of engagement with culture generally, their brand equity, which is how much they love your organization, their level of willingness to take risks, their membership potential, their donation potential, their volunteering potential, and it takes all of that and writes it back to your database. So next time you go in to run a report or pull a list for an email, or all of that data's there. So you can start to initially profile by those things and ultimately to select and target by those things. And when you can do that, you can write differentiated communications about the same event to different people, and that allows you to get very, very high rates of return. Or you can actually, if you've got a lot of events on, you can work out which events to tell who about. So I'm going to stop there. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very quick response on my little discrete signal. Thank you both of you. That was a bit of a moon landing, a crash course in segmentation work. We need to sort of take it down a little notch and go back to where we started, okay? Because you both are specialists and you're both staying, so there will be possibilities now to ask questions and also later on. But I'd like to go back to where we started, because Emma did the survey and she says that 94% of this beautiful lot, they put the members at the core of what they're doing, but only 19% are actually gathering data. And half of this crowd has never done any segmentation before. So would you like to comment on that? You know, we're at the beginning of something that you have been doing for years and years. So I could get sort of a quick comment from both of you to start with.
Well, I think it's a big missed opportunity. Hopefully that's what you've taken from both our presentations, that actually not having the data and not understanding your customers well enough and not segmenting means that you're in danger of becoming irrelevant, both to your existing audiences and your potential audiences. Now, I know there's lots of issues around data and getting hold of data, and I'm sure there'll be lots of buzz about that later. But I think my message to you was just find a way. I think you have to do this stuff, even if it's just at a very simple level. Mm.
Yeah?
It's funny. I think that in the UK, we have a tradition of collecting data. We've been doing it for 10 or 20 years. And it's because when Margaret Thatcher was elected as Prime Minister, she cut cultural funding. And so we all panicked and started to adopt the US model and brought in subscription selling and box office systems. And we started collecting data like mad. It's interesting is that although we've had that, we haven't really done that much with it. So we've got huge amounts of data, and most venues have got data, thousands and thousands of bits of data that they don't even look at anymore, that are almost archived. So I think we're maybe at the two extremes. We've got loads of data and we're not doing anything about it. You haven't got that much data. So it's, I wouldn't beat yourselves up. I think, you start on Monday, you'll get quite a lot quite quickly.
And you can learn from the mistakes that we've made.
Oh yeah, don't copy the UK. Right.
That's very interesting because you go back to work on Monday and you've both given us presentations that are really impressive. You've been doing a lot of studies, you've been asking thousands of people. If I'm a small art gallery with 3 employees, God, where do I start? It sounds extremely complicated.
Well, I think the answer is to start somewhere. The first thing I do when I go into any organisation is say, okay, let's work out what you already know about your audience, because there's probably more than you think. The first thing people say is, oh, should we do a survey? All right, hang on, before we go and do a survey, let's work out what we already know, let's gather all that information, then let's work out what questions we want to ask and what we're going to do with the answers to those questions. Because typically people say, oh, we really want to know how old everybody is. Okay, right, so we find that out. What are you going to do with it? Oh, I don't know, but we just want to know. So I think you have to be really clear about what you want to do with that information. And hopefully what we've given you today is some vision of what some of the benefits could be if you had that information, so that you can be clear about what you actually want to achieve. Going back to your audience development priorities. You're a little gallery, you've got no data. Well, what actually are your audience development priorities? What do you want to be doing? Because that will then shape the data if you need to collect it, your data collection strategy or your segmentation strategy, or the way that you do your marketing, or even develop your products.
Right, so know what you want and then go start segmenting. Andrew, can you comment on that? This very complicated world.
Yeah, no, it's really quite simple. We've got lots and lots of really tiny organisations. 3 staff would be a big move for them.
Okay.
I was working with one last week that has 1.5 staff, and they've started doing culture segments. They don't even have an iPad, so they've got some pieces of card and some pencils, and they collect like that. And they've already got, I think, 12,000 people fully collected and segmented just by asking people to fill them in. And so they've just been doing it with no money at all. So it's not that difficult.
Right, so we've decided that we're going to do it, I guess. We've answered the why, because you're saying that we're in fear of being irrelevant. We don't want that to happen. And you're saying that it's not very complicated. We can start on Monday and we can use our pens and our paper. So, but how should we do it? Because that's where the two of you differ a little bit, because you have chosen 2 different approaches into segmentation. The one is the psychographic that you have just described, Andrew. It's an analysis of suspected customers' needs and motivations. You say that there's not 8 types of people in the world, but still you have put a lot of people in the world you've put in these groups. I don't want to be a segment. I'm an individual.
That's because
So how do you handle that?
That's because you're in the essence segment.
Well, how did you know? That is true. I did tell you. Yes, I'm in the essence. But this is something that we hear all the time. This morning we heard that the new generation, they're individuals. Don't put me in a segment. Don't pigeonhole me. How do you handle that?
It's interesting. So we work with a lot of organisations that run membership schemes and similar things. Essence do not want to join. They are real not joiners. They want to consume on their own terms. So they will join if you put membership between them and the thing they want. So tickets or advanced booking or some kind of benefit. But it just means that when you speak to them, you can't herd them like sheep. You have to recognise their individuality. You have to recognise their knowledge and speak to them in an intelligent way. And then they'll kind of be okay with you. But it's the mistake is to try and is to believe that just because they come often, they love your organisation and want to join. That's probably not true.
That's probably not true.
Well, we found that the 60% of the group that visited the South Bank Centre in London had almost no brand loyalty at all. They were coming 20 times a year, but would have just gone up the road if it was on somewhere else. So they thought the venue was fine, but they had no emotional connection.
I have one more question when it comes to the essence. What if I'm essence in the morning and then stimulation after lunch? Because I'm also a mum. I've got 2 young girls, and I could possibly buy tickets to Disney on Ice. Yeah. What if I'm both? Well,
you won't be, because the Essence buy tickets for Disney.
Okay, bad example.
Yeah, but your segment. I'm not saying that it can't change. It's just saying that it's actually deep in your personal psychology. And it's not correlated one-to-one with this segment by Shakespeare, this segment by Ibsen, this segment go to contemporary dance. In fact, if you go to a Shakespeare performance, you'll probably find, you will find all 8 segments in different proportions, but they'll be there for different reasons. So the reason that you're at Disney is not the same as somebody from entertainment is at Disney.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm understanding how to get you to Disney if I'm selling you Disney, but yeah.
Right, but it's deep in your DNA, is what you're saying.
Can I just go back to the... I'm a firm believer that the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And it's proved to be the case that when you actually look at past behaviour and use that, it's, funnily enough, people are creatures of habit. And the way that we segment is the opposite way round. We end up with the same result. We have the pen portraits of the mainstream attenders with their motivations to attend, how we should be talking to them, all of those things as well. But we start with the behaviour and layer up the other stuff. And the interesting thing to me is that they show very marked similarities. People who attend, and I'm not talking about comedy bookers or Ibsen or Shakespeare, I'm talking about this broad strand approach, that people who attend mainstream work or people who attend classic work actually share a number of motivational characteristics, some demographic characteristics, and certainly in terms of the other things they do with their leisure and culture time, are very similar in those ways. So the beauty of that approach means that if you've got a show that you want to sell, you're not having to write 8 different direct mail letters to them or 8 different emails for the different segments. You actually know that that show is a piece of cutting-edge contemporary work. You can easily go to your database and find all the people who are most likely. Now, remember, with all of this stuff, it's a compromise. Segmentation is a compromise. You're never going to find, it's never going to be 100% accurate. And going back to your example of the ballet, I think it's a real shame that the organisation you bought the ballet tickets for your mum didn't offer the opportunity to tell them it was a gift for your mum and have the organisation post those tickets to your mum. Because had they have done that, they would know that was a gift. They would probably make a note on their database and contact you again a year later and say, was that a present for somebody? Would you like to do it again? You know, was it your mum's birthday? And use that bit of data they have about you in a really constructive way, rather than, oh, God, sending you a letter with Dear Ballet Lover. I completely empathise with you. So it's kind of, you can get to the same point, but I suppose our difference is where you start on that. And for me, as somebody who's worked in many venues myself, I know how difficult it is when you've got shows, seats to fill. The pragmatist in me says, go for something that's actually easy to implement and that you can do on the whole of your audience.
Because I'd like to question you on that, because you're a firm believer that what they've done before is what's going to predict what they'll do again. Mm-hmm. And you say that it's classical, it's contemporary, or it's mainstream. So you even have fewer boxes than the 8.
And then there's the people in the middle who go to one or more of them.
But I'm interested in hearing you saying, because I've learned that if you like music, you like a lot of music. But you're saying that people are very specific in their needs. You can definitely put them into these 3 boxes.
80 to 90%. There will always be the ones who are a bit weird. And they're probably most of us. But the majority, and again, with all of this stuff, it's, you know, you're doing lots of marketing to lots of people. It's really about narrowing down getting your success rates up by narrowing things down. And yes, 80 to 90% of people behave in that way. You cannot argue with that. Even if you take people who've only been once out of it, it's still 70% of the people who behave in that way. And so, you know, you can't argue with the facts of that. And then I know that when you then test actually talking to those people specifically about those products within that broad strand, it has much more effect, 5 times more effective for the Lowry with their contemporary audience than the old model of telling people everything. And occasionally we will drop things in. It's about emphasis. So we'll show them the things that we think should be of most interest to them first. And occasionally we'll throw googlies in. We'll go, okay, so how about this contemporary audience? Let's try them with this. And we might put a certain spin on a particular piece of work to make it more attractive to them because of all the things we know about their motivations. And then we measure to what extent
hang on, because you're doing a second presentation now.
Yeah, sorry,
No, but this is interesting for us to understand. That's 2 different ways into this. You can either do the psychographic, you could think about needs and motivations, this nice little brain scan that you showed us, or you can just look at, okay, previous sales.
But I'm not just looking at previous sales. I start with that.
But isn't that marketing? Is that audience development? Isn't that just marketing?
Well, it's semantics, isn't it? I mean,
it's also, yeah.
You know, if you were working in a commercial company, would you call finding new customers audience development, or would you call it marketing?
So basically you see that as a bit of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were shaking your head really vividly. Would you like to comment on that?
I think that, where shall I start? The orthodox arts marketing has, for decades, told people who've been to Ibsen about Ibsen. But we haven't told them about stand-up comedy. Or we have, but in a brochure with 300 things in it. But if we target them, if you've almost got to have been to something before in order to be told about the next one. If you haven't.
Not in the way I do it.
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about orthodox arts marketing. And so, because of that, it's not surprising that the patterns of booking behavior on databases are that people tend to go to the same kinds of things. Partly because they're the things that we've been telling them about for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And it's not surprising that they don't try new things because they're not the things that we've been telling, they're things we've not been telling them about. So we trap people in to ballet, or we trap them into Ibsen because that's the only thing we know about them. And so, particularly before we had email, when it cost you money to post letters out to people, we only told people about things that we were fairly certain they already that they were likely to come to. And so this is self-fulfilling. I think there are the 2 things you describe are this. We both work with motivations, and we both work with behavior, and we both work with some demographics. The difference, I suppose, is you have to choose which things are the definers, which do you think are the absolute drivers of that, and which are merely describers, things that are quite useful to know about the groups once you've got them. And I would say that understanding why people would book or would not book, or would attend or not attend, is fundamental. And then it's really interesting to know, oh, look, lots of these people have booked for Ibsen before or haven't. And so rather than doing it the other way around. And I think that the appeal of doing it the other way around has always been that it's easy because if you've got a box office system, and I know some of you won't, but if you've got box office data, you've already got the data, so you can just do it now. And the approach of doing it psychographically was very expensive. It involved asking people lots of questions. But because we've made that really effortless now, and because you can segment the vast majority of your active audience instantly, or within a week or 2, and certainly within I think 3 months we've just done one. We're now over about 55%. It's possible now to do it cheaply and quickly. So I think that it's not that I'm not interested in behavior. I'm fascinated by behavior. I want to know what they've booked, how much they spent, whatever. But I want to know it for the people who I've already got in my segments.
I think one of the difficulties, though, of asking people what they're going to do, asking people what they're like, is they lie. Their behaviour doesn't lie. You know, I had a database full of people who said they were interested in contemporary dance when I worked in a theatre. Try getting any of those people to actually come to contemporary dance. Hardly any of them had ever been, but they tick the box that says, I'm interested in contemporary dance.
I agree with that. We don't ask them that. Yeah. We ask them, we give them a psychometric test that's based on psychology. It's not based on preference. We don't say, would you like to go to contemporary dance? I agree, people just tick boxes. We actually ask them questions about their spirituality, for example. We ask them all sorts of questions about their psychology. And then we've correlated that to a huge data set of what they do. So it's, I think the crude way of doing it doesn't work. And that's why segmentation systems didn't used to work very well.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, you agree, you said that either way you choose into segmentation, the result turns out to be the same.
Well, I don't know about the results of culture segments. I know about the results of the work that I do. And I accept that there's been a lot of bad practice gone on in terms of database marketing in the UK for many years, and hence why we had low success rates. And I think that that's had a bad press. And I think that, you know, I actually don't agree with Andrew that I'd like to think arts marketing had been that successful, that we'd been targeting people so well that we've put them into these boxes. I just don't think that's the case at all. In actual fact, it's the opposite. My audience development evolution of man slide, we've all been told to get people who are coming to pantomime to come to contemporary dance and work them along the... So, you know, we've been trying all kinds of things to get them to do that, and it hasn't worked.
But could we discuss that a little bit? Because in Emma's survey, the members of this organization who have done segmentation, they've been working on behavioral studies. So that's worked for them. How much time should we spend in what corner? You had this beautiful matrix, and we all run for the young, sexy audience. You know, we want the 18 to 29-year-olds, the millennials. You know, so how does that correspond with your experience? Are we running for the wrong audience?
I think it depends on your organisation. You have to decide to what extent you want to develop your existing audience and to what extent you need to go and find a new one. And if you need to go and find a new one, to what extent do you need to modify or change the product that you're offering in order to do that? I can't answer that for you, and I don't think there is a perfect balance of that. I wouldn't want to say to you, you should be spending 25% of your time on this and 50% of your time on that, because that depends on what you're trying to do. What I'm saying to you is think about it and know what those priorities are in order to make the right decisions.
In your experience, what have you seen? Are we running for the wrong audience?
I think that arts organisations are brilliant at getting audiences. I think we've no problem at all at getting audiences. Getting them to come back is the problem. Most people in Christian side will have been to the arts. Most of them are not going regularly. So it's not that we can't reach people, it's that we can't engage them. And we don't build relationships well. We tend to market at people or to them. We're not, So I think it's about a little bit of intelligence. I tell you what, I was just going to say, not me to pick your job, but I'd really love to hear some questions from the audience, if that's okay.
I was just looking for some waving
Katie
hands.
and I could do this all day.
As you can tell.
Questions?
Hi, my name's Alison Årsten. I worked in arts marketing in the UK in the early 2000s, and Katie's model is something that I kind of recognise. I haven't been working in audience development for the last few years, and so I haven't really seen Andrew's model before. And I'm fascinated by it. But what I think is, if I were going to use your model, I would be thinking, how on earth do I know how to communicate with all those different kinds of people? If I'm in a small organization, how am I going to make sure that I communicate in the right way so I'm not going to alienate all those different kinds of people with different kinds of motivation? With Katie's model, I kind of see that we're often specialists in what we do, and we know kind of how we're going to communicate the values of the types of event. Could you say something about that?
Sure. No one targets all 8. I mean, that would be crazy. So what we tend to do is if you've got an organisation with a huge number of events, I mean, there are organisations with 200 events on, so they tend to work out, like a festival, for example, would be a really good example of that. Which events in the festival would most appeal to which segments? And then they tend to communicate a smaller message, a subset to those. But more likely, that you've got a core message that you want to send. But it's about optimizing that message. So you optimize it one way for essence. It's not like starting again and doing a whole other one. It's tweaking it. So it's a little bit of language. There's a huge amount of guidance, loads of case studies on how people just tweak the language slightly. So it's interesting. I'll give you an example. We did a contemporary dance event where there was a chance to meet the artistic director who said a few words about the event before you went in. There was a glass of wine, and then you went in and saw it. For Essence, it was come along and, the invitation of the artistic director and to a special drinks reception in which he will tell you about the artistic idea before the event. And people thought, oh, that sounds just the kind of thing people like me would like. For Expression, who hadn't been before, we made the invitation from him with his picture, and he said, I'd like to invite you to come and I will explain it to you, and I'd love to tell you all about how we've done it, and then I'll take you through to your seats. It's exactly the same event. We mixed the two lots of people together, but we got a huge response from the Expression because they thought, I could go to that. That feels like I'm going to be looked after and that feels safe. And so it took 20 minutes to do the second version.
There's one more.
Yes, hello. I'm Jørn Johansen from the Public Library of Oslo. We heard previously today that the majority of the members of audiences in Norway don't feel they have the capacity or competence to work strategically with development of audiences. Based on your experiences, what is the right level or recommended level of investment or capacity to ensure you have the necessary skills and capacity?
Oh my goodness. Well, it depends how big your organisation, what it is you want to do. What are your priorities in your organisation? What are you trying to do with your audiences and visitors?
Oh, sorry. Get it back and give it away.
Sorry, I wasn't clear. This is in the light of the surveys actually saying most organizations don't have anyone doing this.
Anyone, yeah. Well, I think for a start you need to be clear at the very top of the organisation. If you're putting audiences at the heart of what you do, visitors at the heart of what you do, then actually everybody's responsible for marketing, aren't they? So it's about saying, well, what is it that we need to do and who's going to do it? I mean, there's plenty of organisations that I work with in which nobody's got the title marketing in their job title at all, but lots of different people are doing it. Some people will be responsible for welcoming people, other people will be responsible for the sales or whatever. But I think you need to start at the top of the organisation and with the strategy of the organisation. And it comes back to Emma's question about 90-odd% of you saying audiences are at the heart of what you do. How can they be at the heart of what you do if nobody is responsible for that relationship with the audience?
Right, it's actually already 4:15. Time flies when you're having fun. Do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
Yes, we have time for one more question.
Yes, my name is Torben again from Ticketmaster Norway, and I was just wondering, with all these different segments, and some are harder to please than others, and instead of trying to convince the Essence to spend a lot of effort of convincing her, is it more like a cash cow segment that I should focus on to fill the seats, or is it the need to spread my efforts? Or is it some kind of segment that the essence is more prone to be married to that I should reach instead of her?
I think it depends entirely on what your product is. So there are some events for which Essence are the most likely to attend, and if you get the messaging right to them, they will just buy all of your tickets in advance before you even open. There are others for which Essence would really, depending on the event and the way you market it, wouldn't touch it. I think that the real strength of the club segment system is that, as well as segmenting all of the people you've already got inside your audience, it uses exactly the same segmentation system because it's at such a deep level to segment the entire population. So it allows you to work through mailing lists that you've got tagged, but it also allows you to work through media and social media and select the channels, select the messaging, and drive responses from people you've got and people you don't have. I think the idea of optimization, I think we're both saying the same thing really, is that if you are able to produce a particular message that is optimized for the right people, it doesn't feel like selling tickets. It feels like informing the people who already want to buy them.
Right, thank you very much. I think what we can take away from this is that, yes, we do need to start working on our segmentation. So we've answered the why, and then the how. There's probably 10 different approaches.
We could fill the stage.
And that's not the point. The point was showing you two different angles, and I'm sure that both Andrew and Katie will be more than willing to ask questions. And also you're saying that, answer questions. And also you're saying that this is not too complicated. No. Even with 1.5 staff.
Yeah.
Great. So get on with it. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Katie, and thank you, Kristin. Jeg glemte jo å introdusere deg, det er jo skandale. Kristin Danielsen, give her a big hand for dealing with this. Ok, nå skal dere ut og ha dere en pause før vi deler ut publikumsprisen 4:15. Det vil si da innleder vi publikumsprissesjonen, og på vei ut så kan dere jo få med dere hvordan Birger har hatt det nå i det siste. Nå er det sånn at Birger har segmentert seg.
Interessant å følge med på.
Han avbryter bestandig. Han er forresten stimulation, sånn som Andrew faktisk.
Til hele framføringen og klare referanser til godt produsert tysk porno.
Ok.
Og det må jo sies å være utelukkende positivt.
Ja. Tydelig, Andrew, you got to Birger. That's good. Thank you.